What's cracking, people? I'm Theo Kane. What's cracking, people? I'm Theo Kane. Welcome back to Slimehouse TV. And in today's video, I'm going to be sorting out this guy, who you might recognise as the 3D scan and print of my robot from my recent Big Bot Bash episode. If you watched that episode, you'll know that there was a whole section where I 3D scanned the robot that I'd scratch built with a Miracle Revo Point scanner and then 3D printed a version of it, and I showed it at the end of the episode. So what I'm going to do in this video today is get him all sanded, get him primed, and then try out a new kind of paint, or a few different kinds of paint that I've bought, to try and get the perfect green colour that I want for this guy. I want him to look toxic, I want him to look radioactive, and the colour that I did the other one I was happy with, but I wasn't satisfied. So in this episode I really want to level that up. So I'm going to finish up sanding him, finish up getting him all cleaned, and I'll catch up with you after when I've done that so we can start talking about the painting method that I want to try with this guy. So if all that sounds like a bit of you, then as always, sit back, make sure you're comfy, and get yourself strapped in for our brand new episode of Slimehouse TV. Let's do this. So if you've watched any of my videos before where I'm painting the toys that I make, you'll know that I love big, bright, bold colours, and I'm always experimenting with different types of paints to get stuff to look as much like an authentic retro rack toy as possible. But something that I don't feel like I've ever fully got stuck into yet is that really bright neon toy look that's specifically synonymous with toys of the 90s. I'm talking Toxic Crusaders, G.I. Joe Mega Monsters, Trash Bag Bunch, all those types of awesome bright popping colour schemes that scream that whole kind of 90s toxic vibe.
You gotta admit, the guy's got guts.
So what I wanted to do in this video is finally tap into a bit of that, and I thought that this 3D printed version of my Landfang Big Bot Bash robot would be an awesome test subject to finally try and pull off one of those types of paint jobs. So once he were all sanded and prepped and dusted, I got him into the garden and hit him with some primer so I could get him all ready for some radioactive colour scheme experimentation. Okay, so little bit of a rundown first of all of what we're actually working with today. I've got a really nice selection of different neon green / yellow paints. When Bill and Dan came up to Sheffield recently for ChillCon, we had a bit of a day in town the day before the event, and we went to the Outpost and we went to Element Games, and I just picked up a bunch of greens that all looked very radioactive and neon and toxic. I'm not going to go in straight away either, spraying the finished robot. I've got a few little bits here that I'm going to do tests on first before I decide on what colour I'm going to use and which one I take to the most and which one I like the most the look of. Now I've got some old Warhammer pieces here, I've got something that I printed for someone that I sculpted ages ago that was a misprint, and I've also got a bunch of little creatures here that were made by Dan Does. So he sculpted 3 of these, one of them I sculpted for him right before he got into 3D sculpting actually. So I thought they would look cool in like a cool neon green colour as well. And I'm also going to be using a new airbrush for this that I've been sent by a company called Galeri. So this is the Mobius 0.2 Galeri Premium, and they actually told me that this is like made specifically for fine details and things, so that's going to be really nice because my others are just like general airbrushes, and this has got like a different kind of system as well that's going to be interesting. So they sent me this recently to test out, and this is the first time of me using it, and it looks very, very fancy. Now I know that something looking fancy doesn't always correlate to it actually being a good product, but I've heard good things about these, so I'm looking forward to using it. Just before we get into it as well, I would have ideally liked to spray all these with a white primer, but I didn't have any white, I didn't have any grey left, I forgot to order some, so I used Army Painter Bone. Now this is close to white, it's like a bone creamy kind of colour. The only thing with this is sometimes Army Painter dries like satin, it dries with a satin slightly gloss finish and I don't know why. I believe it's supposed to be a matte finish, and so many times I use these Army Painters and they come out nice and matte, and then every now and again you spray one and it comes out glossy. When I sprayed my Bot Bash before, I did all that purple and it weirdly dried in like a glossy kind of finish, and this has done exactly the same, unless there's something wrong with my can, which I don't know. Is there? I don't know, let me know. But I have also been told that basing something cream or yellow is the best way to get like a really nice neon green. So we will see. Let's just have a go. This is all experimenting in today's video. So I started off by getting the new airbrush all set up, and what's really cool about this model is that it's got this tiny pressure gauge that you can turn right at the front of it underneath the cup so that you can adjust the amount of air pressure that's coming through, giving you a lot more control, something that none of my other airbrushes have ever had before, even the more expensive and high-end ones. So that were definitely going to be a nice little feature that I were looking forward to playing around with. Now the first paint that I were going to be trying was a really nice looking bright ghost green airbrush specific paint by Army Painter. So I mixed it with a little bit of thinner using one of my new mixing sticks that I got sent to me recently by Turbo Dork. Hold tight Turbo Dork every single time, and started laying the colour down on the figure. Now I only ever put a little bit of paint inside the airbrush at first, just to see how it's flowing, keeping the pressure low and just hitting it with light short bursts. And this was a really good colour, very much leaning into that vibrant neon style, and absolutely a green that I would have loved to have used on my robot. Unfortunately though, right out the gate I ran into a problem that just meant that this paint was not going to be any good for what I needed it for. So straight away I'm seeing a problem that I often encounter when I'm using these kinds of paints, and it's that it comes out very watery, very thin. Now this might be the same for most of these colours that I've got here today, and the reason that it's a problem is that when I'm cutting back, if I ever make a mistake with a colour, when I'm cutting back with it, I can't cut back over dark purple with a transparent like watery green. It's just not going to work. So I'd have to like use a base colour again and then build up several layers over the top, and it's just always a problem when I'm trying to paint this kind of thing. In fact, this is a problem that I had when I painted this thing, which is my Megatonk from the Bill Making Stuff first collaboration that I did with him on his channel. And I remember I used this exact paint on this, and the reason that I then went over it again with a different kind of green was for that very reason. So I'm going to give this another couple of coats just so that I've got a nice solid representation of that colour. But yeah, I remembered again why I don't use this kind of paint anymore. I've reminded myself now. And that's obviously why we do this. So I got the airbrush all cleaned out and prepped for the next colour that I were going to be trying, this time an AK fluorescent green. Now this is one that I were really excited to try. I saw it on the shelf in the shop and I felt like it almost jumped out at me. AK paints are always top notch from my experience, always nice and thick and have good coverage, so I were buzzing to try this one because if it worked for what I do, it could definitely have a lot of potential. Unfortunately though, I could barely get it to go through the airbrush, and even after giving it a really good shake and mixing it with a decent amount of thinner, it just didn't want to play ball. Okay, this one, AK acrylic fluorescent green, super gloop, super gloopy. So what I'm going to have to do is, rather than just mix this in the little cup with a bit of thinner, I've got to actually pour some of this into a mixer bottle and make an airbrush version of it just for this, because yeah, there's no way this is going through an airbrush in its current state. You saw how messy it is. This is also a good example of how messy airbrushing can get. A lot of the time you see people using this and they make it look easy. It's quite often a very messy process. So we'll stick a bit of this. Look how thick it is. Look at it. It's like coagulated, it's like blood, it's clotting. Like, I gave this a good shake before, you saw me do it. So then what I do is add a bit of thinner into this bottle and just make my own version, so that I don't have to mix it every time in the cup. Slimehouse proprietary paint. So I'll be honest, this is the second time now that I'm having to take this airbrush apart to unclog it. Nothing to do with the airbrush, I'm really liking the airbrush so far. What I'm not liking is AK fluorescent green. I don't know if it needed shaking more, but I shook the hell out of it. But it just is so gloopy and it just does nothing but clog up my airbrush. So maybe it's a paint that isn't good to be used in an airbrush. Maybe it's a paint that is better used by somebody that's better than me and more experienced. However, I'm gonna throw in the towel on that one because I don't want to put it in my airbrush again and ruin it. So I'm gonna take this airbrush apart for the second time, clean it all out, and then move on to the next paint and the next figure, and we'll just forget that one as a bad job. So after that disaster, the next paint up was one that I was feeling a bit more optimistic about, Escapona Green by Game Colour, which is basically very similar to the old Games Workshop Scorpion Green colour, which is one that I always loved growing up. Now this one was nowhere near as vibrant or striking as the previous greens that I'd tried. This one, however, did at least go through the airbrush without any problems and gave good coverage. So no complaints about this paint. Maybe not the exact colour that I were looking for, but at least one that for future projects has a lot of potential. So this next paint was not only by far the best paint of the day, but in terms of acrylic paints, it's one of the best that I've ever used ever. This is AK Luminous Green, and given the results of the AK Fluorescent Green that I'd used earlier, I really didn't have much hope for this. I thought it were probably going to give me very similar results, however I couldn't have been more wrong. This paint is truly fantastic. It came out super thick, but also really fine, so I wasn't losing any detail, and honestly, in terms of coverage and flow and pigment, I couldn't have asked for a better paint consistency. Within a few sprays, I'd pretty much covered the entire model, like 10 out of 10 for a colour this bright to get coverage like this in a little pot of acrylic. I really couldn't have been more impressed with it. Maybe not the exact colour that I were looking for, but definitely one that totally surprised me for how good it looked and how satisfying to use it was. So far it's kind of been like one on, one off, 50-50, some work, some don't. The one that I just did then, the AK Luminous Acrylic, Luminous Green, this one, that worked really, really well. Only needed pretty much like one coat. Unfortunately, it's just not the right colour for what I'm wanting. The next one that I'm going to try is this Warpaint's Fanatic Disgusting Slime. This is an effect paint, so I'm pretty confident that it won't work, but I really, really love the colour. I've just been watching somebody use it on YouTube, and I really don't think this is going to work at all. It's an effect paint, like I said, so this is supposed to be used in the same way as like a Nurgle's Rot or Blood for the Blood God or something like that with your Warhammer paints. But I'm going to try it anyway because, like I said, that colour is beautiful. Spoilers. It didn't work. Not really, and I knew that it probably wouldn't, so I did make sure that I were really careful with how I put it through the airbrush, and I even mixed it with some Turbo Dork thinning solution and stuff, but even then it just weren't happening. Again, it just came out too thin or too gloopy, and not at all one solid colour, even after multiple coats, so a fun experiment even if it wasn't a successful one. The next paint was another game colour, a fluorescent yellow, but after having a little look at the consistency and realising it's one that I have tried to use before, I decided to give this one a swerve, because I knew that it were going to be no good for what I needed and I didn't want to mess up an old Space Marine, so this guy got the day off and it was all down to this little douchebag to try the very last paint of the day on. And that paint was Tamiya Light Green, which although is labelled as an acrylic paint, is actually a lot more solvent based, so quite a bit different to the other paints that I've used here, and one that you have to take a little bit more care with. So for starters, you have to mix it with something like Mr. Hobby Thinner, which is what I used. You also have to clean your brushes in thinners after using them, you can't just rinse them in water. Tamiya can also corrode synthetic brushes and ruin them, so some people only use sable hair or real fur brushes with this kind of paint. Not me personally, I don't buy real hair brushes, I have before, but I don't like to these days. After doing a bit of research into it, I think it's a bit unethical and cruel, and I'm a real animal lover. But yeah, either way, Tamiya is a paint that you can't just use like a normal acrylic. Now this wasn't a paint that was really part of this little experiment really, because I knew that this were going to work. It were more about just testing whether it were the right kind of colour that I needed, which unfortunately, even though it was a really nice green, just wasn't the kind of neon popping, vibrant, striking retro green colour that I were looking for. So after a couple of hours, I had 6 examples of 6 very different paints, and using what I'd learnt from this little activity, I was confident that I would be able to then make a decision on the best way to move forward. Which would be the best ones to use, which ones would be best left for a different project, and which ones would combine together nicely to give me that perfect retro radioactive paint job for my 3D printed Big Bot Bash Landfang action figure. So I feel like that was a decent, thorough test of fluorescent and neon paints, at least the ones that I've got readily available to me at my local hobby stores. And there is of course always the option of using a can of graffiti spray paint, but I'll always try and avoid using that if I don't have to. I recently used it on a figure here on the channel, and although the finish at the end was really nice, it took a long time to get to that point. That paint can be very unforgiving, it comes out really thick. Also, if you want to cut back with that spray paint, you have to spray a little bit of it into like a lid or a puddle or something like that, and then quickly cut back with it before it ruins your brush. I've also known people put it inside their airbrush. I got told very recently by a friend that you can put it in an airbrush with some thinners and that works, but then I've also been told that that's ruined people's airbrush and their setup when they've tried to use it, so who knows, maybe that's something that we'll even try on a future video. But anyway, using all that knowledge from that little test, I did then go away and paint my Landfang robot, so I'm going to unveil that to you in a second. But before we do that, I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. And if you want to support what I do here at the channel, you want to see the content continue, then the best way to keep that going, the best way to support that, the best way to directly fund Slimehouse and what I do here is by joining my Patreon over at patreon.com/SlimehouseTV. There's a couple of different perks on there that get you access to our private Discord. You also get access to some of the STLs that I create for a limited time, including right now, you can download the very STL that I've painted. The Landfang Miracle Scan is currently the STL that's available on Patreon, so I'd love to see you download it and paint it in your own way, in your own style. But fundamentally, perks aside, by joining the Patreon, all that money, like I said, goes directly back into the channel and helps me keep it going. It's basically the reason that Slimehouse exists. So if you do join that, it's very much appreciated. And if you do download that STL of Landfang and you do paint it, then please tag me, let me see it, because I'd love to see how different people interpret it in their style. But speaking of paint jobs and speaking of painting Landfang, as I said, I have painted mine. So I'm going to unveil that for you right now. So without further ado, let's do this. So there he is, my fully painted version of the 3D printed Landfang from this year's Big Bot Bash. And I tell you something I'm going to do straight away, I'm going to take this jacket off because I can see that he's clashing and we're kind of matchy-matchy today and that you're not going to be able to see him properly. Now, like I said, for this I wanted to go pure neon, fluorescent and vibrant for the whole thing, and I really feel like I pulled it off. And one thing that you might notice straight away is that I went for this crazy splatty effect. Now, I suppose you could call this like 90s splattercore aesthetic. This is a kind of paint job that you would see on like Hot Wheels cars back then, or Nerf guns. The Nasty Boys in WWF, they used to wear outfits that had paint splattered all over it, and I always really liked that look. Also, some of the old Toxic Crusaders figures as well, they used to have a bit of neon paint splattered around their feet and stuff, so this is all just a homage to all that kind of thing. And it's also a type of paint job that I've wanted to do for a long time. When I did that Megatonk for the Bill Making Stuff first collaboration, I really wanted to try it on that, but I kind of bottled it at the last minute because I didn't want to ruin my paint job. So this was a perfect excuse to try and do it again. So what I did is I put some paint on a toothbrush and I splattered it all around his feet, and then with an ice cream spoon I scooped up some different colour paint and then just blew on it really hard, and it gave this really awesome like spider webbing effect, and I think it came out really awesome. In terms of the colour scheme and the paint job, what I also did as well is I went for a gradient effect. So for the top half of him, I used the AK Luminous Green, not the fluorescent one, the luminous one that I really liked. And then for the bottom half, I used that Escopina Green, the one that's like the old Citadel Scorpion Green colour. And I did a nice gradient, so from his feet upwards and his hands upwards. And even though those two colours, the Escopina Green and the AK Fluorescent Green, were two colours that initially I thought maybe are not right, once I'd combined them and then that mixed with all the other colours, the hot pink and the purple which I used and the black, it all just came together really nice. Now originally, even though I didn't like the paint and it was really hard to use, I was going to go in with the AK Fluorescent Green, and I actually covered the whole thing in that before I did this, and I gave it like 3-4 layers, but it just wasn't drying consistently, it was all over the place. Also, because it's so thick and weird and gloopy, it was spraying out little tiny pieces of dried paint while it was putting the wet stuff on, and it was leaving this weird gritty texture all over it that just looked horrible. So I basically had to strip all this thing and start all over again. I had to put it in some methylated spirits and in my stripping machine and stuff, which added like a whole evening's work to painting this thing. But I'm really happy with how it looks now. I definitely think I made the right decision with the colours that I went for. Something else that was a really cool happy accident as well is, let me show you this. While I were building the original scratch-built Landfang, while I were building his head and putting it together, it kinda accidentally got an old Kenner Terminator style effect where you shine a light through the top of his eyes and it makes the eyes glow ever so slightly. But on this guy, if you use a black light, it looks like his horn and his eyes are like fully charged and fully irradiated, and yeah, it's just a really happy accident that I didn't expect, but it came out really cool. Now the reason it does that is because I 3D printed his horn, his eyes and these pipes at the side in a different type of resin. I used a clear Resi 1 and then I mixed a bit of neon pink pigment in it. And I thought it might look okay, it might be cool just to have a different coloured element, but it actually gave me this really nice effect that I didn't expect, but I'm all here for. So like I said, the STL for this guy is currently available on my Patreon, so I'd love to see how you paint it if you download one and print one for yourself. Also, in terms of colour schemes, I'd love to know if there's any other neon paints that I've not tried that you think would work for this style that I'm really trying to get better at. I did also see as well that my favourite paint company, ProAcryl, put out a set of fluorescent paints that I didn't even know existed until I was talking to my friend Zambies recently and she was using it. Now, I've not seen this set for sale anywhere in England. I thought I had pretty much the full set, so I have messaged ProAcryl to find out if there's anywhere in the UK that I can pick a set of them up, because if ProAcryl do fluorescents, then obviously I want to try them. But yeah, if there's any other brands or paints that you think might work for this style that will give me a nice solid block colour, and also if there's any other colour schemes that you'd like to see me try, then let me know, because like I said, this is a type of painting that I really want to incorporate into my figures more moving forward, and something that I really want to get better at and like just get more knowledge on. I'd also love to know what you think of the figures, and also now that you can see them both side by side, we've got the scratch built figure and the 3D printed toy version of the figure. Which one do you prefer? Which one do you think slaps the hardest? Let me know down in the comments below. Obviously as well, I painted this guy with that new Galeri airbrush that I got sent, and they just sent it me. It's not a sponsored video or anything like that. All these paints I bought myself, and the Galeri airbrush I just got sent to me to test, but I really liked it. Like, that thing is an absolute workhorse. I put every kind of paint through it, every kind of consistency, and it just like kept going the whole time. It only clogged a couple of times when I was using that really stupid thick paint. So yeah, shouts to Galeri for sending me that, and if you want to check one of those out for yourself, there is an affiliate link and a discount code down in the description of this video as well, so go check that out if you want to get one of them, because like I said, they didn't send it me as a sponsored video or anything like that, but I would definitely recommend it. So I think that's everything for today's video. Another episode where I've ended up with a figure that I'm really happy with, something else to join the shelf with all the other things that I make. And as always, I just want to say a massive thank you again to everybody that took the time to watch this video today. With all of the other stuff that you could be watching on YouTube, it really does mean a lot that you come back here every single week and watch my channel, and I hope to catch you in the next video. So until then, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, this is my 3D printed painted Landfang, and I'll hopefully catch you in the next one, but until then, I'm gone. Pow.